The signal came in the middle of a quiet night shift at the Human deep space outpost. The station floated alone near a small red star, surrounded by silence so deep that even the hum of the systems felt alive. The communication officer was half asleep when a faint pulse appeared on the screen, a repeating pattern, weak but steady. At first they thought it was a malfunction, just another background echo from deep space, but then the pattern shifted. It wasn't random. It carried rhythm, like a voice trying to break through the static. They boosted the signal, and for several minutes strange sounds filled the room, a mix of sharp tones and drawn-out murmurs. It wasn't any human language. The officer called the commander to the deck, and soon the whole control room was awake. They ran the signal through the translation systems, and pieces of meaning began to form. It was a message for help, a distress call, and the coordinates led to a planet that wasn't on any recent star maps. For hours the crew worked in silence, replaying the signal again and again. It was faint, scattered by storms of cosmic radiation, but one phrase came through clearly, a desperate call that translated to, "Help us." That simple plea cut through the tension. Someone, somewhere, was alive and begging for rescue. The commander gathered the senior officers and engineers. The discussion went on through the night. Many argued it was too risky to answer. The message could be a trap. Out there in the void, no one knew what kind of life might be waiting. Others said it was their duty to respond, that if humanity ignored a cry for help, they'd be no better than the darkness around them. Outside the station windows, the red star burned dimly, throwing long shadows across the metal walls. The silence of space seemed to listen to their argument. Finally, the commander stood and made the call. Humanity had always reached out, even when it cost them dearly. They would go. The next days were filled with movement. Messages were sent to nearby colonies, and soon a small rescue fleet began to form. They named the mission Resolute Dawn, a symbol of hope and courage. Engineers worked to prepare ships capable of traveling through uncharted systems. The fleet wasn't large, just a handful of exploration and supply vessels, but each one carried people who volunteered, knowing they might not come back. Among the crew, there was a strange mix of fear and excitement. Some believed they were about to make first contact with a lost alien civilization. Others whispered about the stories of Deathworlders, planets so hostile that even machines refused to land. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. This mission could change everything. When launch day came, the outpost grew silent. Families and friends gathered to say their last goodbyes through long-distance transmissions. The faces on the screens were blurred by poor signals, but the emotions were clear. People smiled to hide their fear, pretending this was just another mission. But deep inside, they all knew. Space didn't forgive mistakes. The fleet departed slowly, one ship after another disappearing into the endless dark. As the engines fired, the stars stretched into lines and the known world faded behind them. For the first time, they were heading toward a part of the galaxy where no human had ever gone. Weeks passed. The signal guided them, faint but constant, pulling them deeper into unknown space. Every day they decoded more fragments, images of storms, flashes of ruined landscapes, and voices crying out in confusion. The scientists on board worked endlessly, trying to piece together who these beings were and what had happened to them. The more they discovered, the more haunting it became. The images seemed to show a planet that had once been alive, covered with oceans, cities, and lights. Now it looked broken, swallowed by dust and lightning. The message wasn't just a cry for help. It felt like a warning. The journey wasn't easy. The fleet crossed through regions filled with debris and strange gravitational fields. Navigation systems failed more than once, forcing the pilots to rely on manual controls. Sleep was rare. The crew grew quiet, their faces pale under the blue glow of the instruments. Even laughter felt strange, like it didn't belong in that cold darkness. One night, as they approached the outer edge of the coordinates, a young technician noticed something odd, a pattern hidden beneath the distress signal. It wasn't part of the call for help. It was older, layered underneath, almost like a second voice whispering beneath the first. When filtered through the computer, it translated into fragmented words. "Don't come here." The discovery shook everyone. The message they thought was a plea might also be a warning. The commander called an emergency meeting. They reviewed every possibility, from a natural disaster to a trap set by hostile forces. But they were already too close to turn back. The decision was made. They would complete the mission, but with caution. 2 days later, their sensors detected the planet. It appeared suddenly on the main display, a dark sphere surrounded by electric storms. Its atmosphere flickered with violent flashes that looked like fire from orbit. No radio traffic, no clear energy readings, only chaos. And yet, beneath all that noise, the distress signal still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that refused to die. The closer they got, the more unstable their instruments became. Magnetic readings jumped wildly, and navigation systems struggled to keep course. The pilots fought to steady the ships as turbulence shook them. From the bridge, the planet filled the view, vast, broken, and beautiful in its destruction. When the first drone was sent to the surface, it barely lasted a minute before its signal cut off. The crew watched the feed freeze, showing a single image, a field of ash and twisted metal. Something had torn through the ground itself, leaving massive scars across the landscape. Still, the commander ordered the second drone down, this time shielded and reinforced. It lasted longer, managing to send clearer images. There were structures buried in the dust, not natural formations, but ruins. Towers half collapsed, walls carved with strange patterns, and what looked like shattered glass domes. Whatever civilization had lived there, it had fallen long ago. As they studied the footage, someone noticed movement, a faint shadow crossing one of the ruined streets. It was gone before the cameras could focus, but it meant one thing. Something was alive down there. The discovery filled the fleet with both fear and hope. Maybe the survivors had sent the distress signal. Maybe they were waiting for rescue. But no one could explain why the signal also carried a warning. Preparations began for a landing mission. Only a few volunteered to go, and they were chosen carefully. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers trained for extreme environments. The commander watched them suit up, their faces hidden behind helmets, their steps slow and deliberate. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to say. As the landing craft descended, storms surrounded it, lightning flashing across the cockpit windows. The pilot struggled to keep control while static roared through the radios. The rest of the fleet listened in silence as the craft vanished into the thick atmosphere. For long minutes there was only static. Then a voice came through, broken but clear enough to make everyone hold their breath. "We've landed," the pilot said. "The ground is unstable. Skies filled with dust. Visibility low. But the signal is stronger here. It's coming from beneath us." The command deck erupted with noise. Relief and tension mixed together. The fleet had finally reached the source, but no one knew what waited below. Hours passed. The ground team moved slowly through the ruins, sending back images that stunned everyone. Entire cities buried under gray storms, massive skeletons of towers and strange markings that seemed to glow faintly when touched. They followed the readings deeper, until the signal became almost overwhelming. Then came the final message from the team that night. "We found an entrance. There's something alive down here. It's watching us." The transmission cut off. The screen went dark. On the fleet's bridge, silence returned. Outside, the planet turned slowly, a dying world with secrets buried under its own dust. And in that silence, the commander felt the weight of their decision. They had come to help, but something about this place felt wrong. It was as if the planet itself didn't want to be saved. Above the storms, the fleet drifted quietly, their lights small against the vast darkness. Somewhere deep below, the faint signal kept pulsing, slow, steady, and patient, waiting for them to come closer. The planet looked even more terrifying when the fleet moved into low orbit. From above, it seemed alive, shifting and growling with endless storms. Thick clouds rolled like waves, glowing from inside as lightning flashed again and again. The crew watched through the wide observation windows, and even those who had spent years in deep space felt uneasy. It wasn't just another alien world. It felt wrong, as if the planet itself was angry. The landing team's signal came through the static, weak but steady. They had set up a small base near the ruins they discovered earlier. Dust storms made it hard to see, and every movement outside the shelter was dangerous. The ground shook often, and strange magnetic fields interfered with their equipment. Communication dropped out every few minutes, forcing the crew in orbit to wait in silence until the signal returned. The commander didn't sleep much. He kept staring at the live feed from the surface, watching the team move slowly through the gray landscape. The air was thick and poisonous, filled with fine ash that clung to every surface. The suits hissed as they filtered the air, but even then breathing was hard. Every step left deep marks in the dust, which swirled around like smoke before settling again. The team's cameras showed huge metallic fragments sticking out from the ground, parts of ships, maybe hundreds of years old. Some were human-shaped with familiar designs, but others looked completely alien, as if built by creatures with different senses and tools. The ground was littered with wreckage, torn apart as if a storm of energy had ripped through everything. As they walked further, they found what looked like the remains of a city. The walls were carved from a strange black stone that shimmered when light touched it. Some structures still stood, though broken, while others had sunk halfway into the earth. The city stretched as far as the fog allowed them to see. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no birds, no wind sounds, nothing but the crunch of boots and the crackling of static through their radios. Then, something unusual appeared on their scanners. Beneath the surface, deep underground, there were tunnels, long, twisting paths that ran for miles. The distress signal came from there. The team gathered at what seemed to be an entrance, a massive doorway half buried in rubble. The structure pulsed faintly with light, like it was still alive somehow, even after all these years. They cleared the entrance and stepped inside. The air was heavier, the temperature dropping sharply. Their helmet lights reflected off smooth walls covered in markings. Some looked like writing, but no one could understand it. The deeper they went, the more they felt an odd vibration, like the ground itself was breathing. Back in orbit, the fleet's scientists studied the readings and noticed something strange. The planet's magnetic field was fluctuating in impossible ways. Sometimes it spiked high enough to disrupt their sensors entirely. Other times it disappeared completely. The readings looked more like a heartbeat than a natural phenomenon. It was as if the planet was reacting to the humans' presence. Hours turned into days. The ground team sent updates whenever they could. They found rooms filled with strange machines covered in dust, their purpose long forgotten. Some looked like control panels, others like power sources, but nothing worked anymore. The team recorded everything carefully, sending data back to the fleet for analysis. Then they made a discovery that silenced the entire command deck. Deep in the tunnels, they found chambers lined with glass-like capsules. Inside were shapes, not machines, not fossils, but bodies. Alien bodies, small, thin and fragile, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Some were still intact, as if they had been sleeping. Others were nothing but empty shells. The crew watching from orbit couldn't believe what they were seeing. These were the beings who had sent the distress call, or perhaps their ancestors. They looked peaceful, almost gentle, completely unlike the hostile image many expected. One of the scientists whispered softly, "They were just trying to survive." Suddenly, the signal strength spiked. The distress message that had been repeating for weeks grew louder, clearer, echoing through the tunnels. But now there was something new in it. A second tone, deeper, mechanical, like a reply coming from somewhere else below. The crew froze. They had activated something. The team tried to trace the source, following the sound deeper underground. Their lights flickered as they descended. The air pressure rose and strange patterns of light began to move across the walls, forming shapes that resembled faces. Every step forward made their instruments go wild. Then one of the crew members shouted over the radio. He had found something, a vast chamber filled with machines. At its center was a massive structure, half organic and half metal, glowing faintly. The distress signal was coming from it. It looked like a communication core, maybe an ancient transmitter, but it was still functioning, powered by something deep within the planet. The commander ordered the team to proceed carefully. They approached the structure and began scanning it. The results were confusing. The material wasn't any element known to humans. It reacted to touch, shifting colors almost like it was alive. Suddenly, the surface of the structure moved. A ripple ran across it and a voice filled their radios. Not a scream, not a word, but a low tone that sent chills down their spines. Their translator systems tried to make sense of it, and after several attempts, a broken sentence formed. "Who are you?" No one spoke for several seconds. The commander told them to identify themselves as explorers and rescuers. The reply came quickly, more distorted this time. "No. Rescue. Death. World." Then the signal faded again. The room went completely dark for a few seconds. When the lights came back, all the instruments showed massive energy surges below them. The machines around the chamber began to hum softly, as if waking from a long sleep. The team quickly backed away, but the walls themselves started to shift. It was like the whole structure was alive and aware of them. In orbit, the fleet's sensors went crazy. The planet's surface temperature spiked and the magnetic fields began to twist violently. The commander shouted for the team to return immediately. Static filled the comms, and the last thing they heard from the ground was someone saying, "It's moving. The ground is moving." A few minutes later, the entire underground network appeared to shift on their scans. Something huge was active under the surface, spreading like waves. Then the signal from the landing team cut off completely. For several long minutes, there was silence. The fleet drifted helplessly above the storming world, unable to contact the surface. When the signal finally returned, it wasn't the landing team. It was the same distress call, but now it sounded different. The words were slower, heavier, repeating the same message over and over, now ending with a phrase that translated roughly to, "They have returned." No one knew what that meant. The scientists tried to decode it. The technicians checked their systems again and again, but nothing made sense. The readings from the planet showed massive energy spikes underground, followed by flashes of light visible even from orbit. Then, through the clouds, the crew saw it. Small glimmers of metal rising into the sky. At first they thought it was debris from explosions, but the shapes began to move in perfect formation. Machines, drones, hundreds of them. The commander's face went pale. The fleet was unarmed, designed for rescue, not war. He ordered immediate defensive maneuvers. The ships moved into position, shields up, while they tried again to contact the surface. There was no response, and only static. The crew could only watch as the drones rose higher, forming a ring around the planet like a mechanical storm. The energy readings climbed higher still. It felt as though something old and angry had awakened. No one spoke for a long time. The realization settled slowly. The distress signal wasn't just a call for help. It was also a warning left by something that had once lived there, and now, by answering it, humanity might have triggered whatever nightmare had destroyed this world long ago. In the command room, the commander stood silently, his eyes fixed on the swirling storms below. The planet roared beneath them as if alive again. The crew waited for his next order, but none came. The only sound was the whisper of static on the radio, the same broken words repeating endlessly. No mercy. No return. The silence that followed was heavy and strange. Everyone on the fleet waited for a voice from the surface, but none came. The planet below was restless, covered in dust and lightning. The crew watched from their observation screens as the scanners searched for any sign of life. Hours went by, and just when hope started to fade, a weak signal broke through the static. It was one of the landing team members. His voice trembled, filled with exhaustion and fear, but he was alive. He said they had survived something they could barely describe. The tunnels had collapsed after the machines started to move, and most of their equipment was destroyed. The few who managed to escape were trapped in a deep chamber they hadn't seen before. The air there was breathable but strange, filled with a faint glowing mist. They weren't alone. There were living beings down there, survivors. The crew in orbit stared at the monitors as the faint transmission turned into video. The image was blurry, but through the flickering light they saw them. Tall, thin figures with pale skin and large dark eyes that reflected the glow around them. Their movements were slow, careful, and their expressions carried both fear and hope. These were the aliens who had sent the distress call, the last ones left of their kind. The team on the surface tried to communicate. At first, the aliens didn't respond, just watched silently, their faces unreadable. Then, one of them stepped forward and touched the human's gloved hand. Through their translator devices, a weak sound came through. Not quite words, more like emotions being translated into broken speech. "Help! Stay! Danger!" The commander listened from the fleet, his face tense. The meaning was unclear, but one thing was certain. These beings were asking for help, and they were terrified of something still on the planet. The following hours were tense, but filled with wonder. The aliens led the humans through a passage to a hidden chamber where a small number of their people were gathered. They were weak, malnourished, and clearly dying. Their world had fallen long ago. They called themselves the Valen, a race that once lived peacefully, spreading across several worlds. But they had been hunted and destroyed by something they called the Swarm. Through gestures and translated fragments, they told their story. Many years ago, machines from the void had come, countless metallic beings that consumed everything. They destroyed cities, devoured the planet's surface, and left only ruin behind. The Valen had built the underground city to survive, but even that wasn't enough. The swarm had found them and wiped out nearly all life. The distress signal had been sent not just as a plea for rescue, but as a warning. The Valen had wanted to stop anyone from coming here. When the story ended, the humans felt both sorrow and guilt. They had come to help, but by landing, they had reactivated something that had been sleeping beneath the ground. The swarm wasn't gone. It had been dormant, waiting. The commander ordered supplies to be sent down. Medical officers and technicians worked tirelessly to save the survivors. They gave them filtered water, protein packs, and oxygen from portable tanks. The aliens accepted the help, but their eyes showed deep sadness as if they knew it was already too late. Outside the hidden chamber, strange sounds echoed through the tunnels. Metallic scraping, a low vibration that grew stronger with every passing hour. The humans checked their instruments and found that several energy sources were moving closer. Thousands of them. The commander didn't wait. He ordered all ships to move into defensive positions and began preparing for possible evacuation. The scientists tried to analyze the readings and confirmed the worst. The swarm was reawakening. Drones and machines were rising from the deep layers of the planet. On the surface, the rescue team began gathering the alien survivors, but the ground trembled violently. Cracks appeared and waves of dust filled the air. The team's transport craft had been damaged, leaving only one functioning. They had to choose who to bring first. The aliens insisted that the humans go, but the commander refused to abandon them. "Everyone gets out," he said firmly through the comms. "No one gets left behind." As the evacuation began, the skies above the planet turned darker. From orbit, the fleet watched the surface erupt in flashes of light. Massive mechanical figures broke through the crust. Machines shaped like twisted insects glowing with red energy. The swarm was awake. The fleet tried to send a rescue craft, but the storm made it nearly impossible. Every few minutes, communication cut out. The humans on the ground fought to keep the aliens safe, carrying them through collapsing tunnels toward the open field where the ship waited. The air was filled with dust and the sound of thunder mixed with something metallic and unnatural. At last, the first craft lifted off, carrying the wounded aliens and part of the team. It shook violently as it rose through the storm, lightning striking around it. The commander's voice came through the radio, calm but strained. "Hold together. We're bringing you home." But the nightmare wasn't over. The machines were already reaching the surface. From the fleet's scanners, hundreds of moving signals spread across the planet like a wave of fire. Some drones rose into the air, attacking anything that emitted power. The orbiting ships opened defensive shields and tried to provide cover fire. But their weapons were limited. They weren't a war fleet. The second rescue craft launched, carrying the remaining crew and more Valen survivors. As it broke through the thick clouds, one of the swarm's drones collided with it, damaging an engine. The ship spiraled briefly before stabilizing. Everyone on the fleet held their breath until the craft finally broke free of the atmosphere. When it docked with the command ship, cheers erupted through the halls. Against all odds, they had saved someone. Inside the medbay, the rescued aliens lay quietly, their eyes half open, staring at the humans who moved around them. They looked tired but peaceful. The doctor on board checked their vitals, amazed that they had survived so long in such harsh conditions. One of the aliens reached out weakly, pointing toward the window where the planet still glowed beneath the storms. Through the translator came a faint voice. "It follows. You cannot stop it." The words made the room go silent. Everyone understood. The swarm wasn't just a local threat. It was something far greater, a force that consumed worlds. And now it knew humans existed. The commander stood before the viewing glass, his reflection mixing with the image of the dying planet. He had seen war before, but never anything like this. There was no emotion in the swarm, no logic or mercy. It only existed to destroy and grow. The fleet's scientists continued decoding the alien archives retrieved from the tunnels. The data confirmed that the swarm's origin was unknown, but the Valen believed it wasn't purely alien. Some of their records hinted at something shocking: fragments of human code within the swarm systems. As if long ago humans had something to do with its creation. The idea spread like wildfire through the fleet. Could humanity be responsible for what destroyed these beings? Was this their own forgotten experiment turned against the galaxy? No one had answers. The commander finally made his decision. The fleet would retreat from orbit immediately. They had rescued the survivors, gathered evidence, and seen enough to know this place was beyond saving. Before leaving, he sent one last message to the surface, a simple transmission that echoed through the planet's broken skies. To whoever hears this, forgive us. We came to help. As the ships pulled away, the planet below shook again, brighter than ever before. Massive energy readings spiked from the core, as though the planet itself was collapsing from within. The crew watched in silence, unable to look away. The Valen survivors turned their faces from the sight, their eyes filled with tears. The light grew until it consumed everything. Then in an instant it was gone. The planet dimmed, falling silent once more. The fleet drifted in the darkness, carrying the last survivors of a lost world and the heavy truth of what they had found. No one spoke for a long time. The commander finally recorded a report for Earth, calm, detailed, but with one haunting line at the end. We were not the first to face the swarm, but we might be the next. Outside the windows, the stars looked colder than ever. Far below, the world they had tried to save was gone, and yet, deep in the ship's long-range scanners, something faint appeared. A signal. The same pattern as before, a distress call repeating endlessly. This time no one moved to answer it. The fleet stayed in orbit longer than they should have, watching the planet turn slowly under them. Everyone hoped that the silence below was only temporary, that maybe the storm would calm down and the readings would return to normal. But as the hours passed, strange things began to happen. The sensors started picking up faint movement around the planet, objects drifting in patterns that seemed too organized to be natural. At first the crew thought they were pieces of debris, but soon they realized they were machines. Hundreds of them. The commander stood quietly on the command bridge, staring at the monitor. The machines formed a ring around the planet, moving with perfect coordination. Their design was sharp and alien, built for speed and precision. The way they shifted made it clear. They were preparing for something. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew what that meant. They were under threat. The fleet immediately went into defensive mode. Shields were raised, engines prepared for quick movement, and all external lights were turned off to reduce detection. The communication officers tried to reach the alien survivors in the medical bay to see if they knew what was happening. The answer came in broken, quiet words from one of the Valen survivors. Through the translator came a chilling phrase. "They know you are here. They do not forgive." The words filled the room with dread. The commander ordered all crew to battle stations, though most of them had never faced a real combat situation. These were rescue ships, not war machines. They were built to help, not fight. Still, every person on board prepared to defend their lives. Moments later, the first attack came. From the shadow of the planet, a swarm of drones shot upward, glowing with red and blue energy. They moved fast, faster than any known technology the humans had ever seen. They didn't use bullets or lasers. Instead, they emitted pulses of energy that tore through shields and scrambled communications. The fleet responded with defensive countermeasures, but the attacks kept coming. The ship shook violently as the first wave hit. The alarms screamed, red lights flashing through the narrow corridors. Crew members rushed to control panels, trying to stabilize the systems. Sparks flew as one of the smaller vessels took direct damage to its engines. The commander barked orders to keep formation, but static filled the radios, and one by one, parts of the fleet started losing contact with each other. In the chaos, the scientists noticed something strange on their radar. The attacking drones weren't aiming to destroy. They were scanning. Every hit they made seemed to gather data, as if they were studying the ships, learning how they worked. That discovery made everything worse. The enemy wasn't just fighting, they were understanding. Down in the medical bay, the Valen survivors began reacting violently. Their thin bodies shook, and one of them whispered something in their own language, then translated through the device. They are awake. The watchers below, they will not stop. It was clear they were not just talking about the drones outside. Something else was moving deep under the planet's surface. On the main screen, the planet began to glow. It wasn't sunlight or fire, it was energy. Massive veins of blue light spread across the dark surface, creating patterns that looked like circuits. The commander realized with horror that the planet itself was part of a machine, maybe even alive in some way. The Death World, as the scientists had named it, wasn't just a world, it was a system built long ago for something far beyond their understanding. The surviving Valen explained that their ancestors had built part of this machine to protect themselves when the swarm first came, but over time the system turned against them. It had been reprogrammed, corrupted, and left to consume everything. The distress call was their final act, a desperate hope that someone would come, though they feared what might happen if anyone did. The fleet was running out of time. Their shields were weakening and ammunition was low. The commander made a hard decision to pull the fleet farther from orbit. But as soon as they began to move, the drones adjusted their formation, surrounding them completely. A wall of machines blocked every possible escape path. One of the younger pilots panicked and fired at the nearest drone. The explosion sent shockwaves through the cluster, but within seconds the drones reformed and multiplied. The blast seemed to awaken more of them. Now the entire orbit glowed with hundreds of red lights circling the fleet like a storm of angry eyes. Amid the chaos, the commander called for the science officers. They had been studying the planet's signal ever since they arrived, and now they presented their findings. What they found was unbelievable. The source of the swarm's control signal wasn't on the planet. It was coming from beneath it, buried deep in its molten core. The machine intelligence that ruled the swarm had been sleeping there, waiting for a new presence to awaken it. "We triggered it," the scientist said quietly. "Our signal woke it up." The realization hit everyone at once. They hadn't just responded to a call for help. They had reactivated something ancient and deadly. The commander made a quick decision. The only chance they had was to destroy the control core. If they could disable the source, maybe the drones would lose coordination and shut down. But to do that, someone had to go back to the surface. A group of volunteers stepped forward. They knew it was nearly impossible, but they couldn't just run and leave countless others in danger if this thing ever spread beyond the planet. They boarded a small shuttle, equipped with whatever limited explosives and energy charges they had left. As the shuttle descended, the fleet above continued to fight for survival. The drones struck from every direction, forcing the ships to maneuver through the storm of light. Sparks danced across the control panels as the hulls cracked and systems overloaded. The commander's voice echoed through every speaker, calm but firm, guiding his people through the chaos. "Hold steady. They're buying us time." The shuttle entered the thick atmosphere, fighting against turbulence that felt like waves in an ocean. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the broken landscape below. The ground was covered with glowing symbols now, like veins pulsing with life. The crew aboard the shuttle could feel the vibrations even through the metal walls. The planet wasn't just alive, it was awake. When they reached the surface, everything felt heavier. The air was filled with energy, humming through their suits. They could see strange figures moving in the distance, machines shaped like twisted versions of life crawling out of the earth as if being reborn. The crew pushed forward, following their scanners to the center of the glowing field. That was where the core lay hidden. Back in orbit, the commander watched their progress through flickering signals. Every few seconds, their connection faded, but he refused to look away. The fleet had already lost too many. If this team failed, it would all be over. The shuttle team reached the core entrance, a massive circular opening leading into darkness. They placed the explosives as quickly as they could, their hands shaking. The ground trembled violently as if the planet sensed what they were doing. The machines began to close in, crawling from every direction. The team worked faster, activating the detonator just as the first wave reached them. The screen went white. In orbit, the explosion was visible even through the clouds. A wave of energy surged from the surface, pushing the drones back. The commander shouted for the fleet to retreat. For a moment, it looked like the plan had worked. The drones flickered, their formation breaking apart. The glow on the planet dimmed, but then a sound filled the ship's communication channels, a deep mechanical voice repeating in a slow, echoing tone, "No mercy, no return." The words weren't from the humans or the Valen. They came from the swarm itself. The planet began to collapse in on itself. The light from the explosion grew brighter, spreading through every crack and valley. The fleet moved as fast as their engines allowed, escaping the gravitational pull as the world below fell apart. The commander gave the final order to jump to deep space. When the stars stretched around them and the chaos faded, silence filled the ships again. The surviving crew stared at their screens, breathing hard, unable to speak. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. Later, the scientists confirmed the readings. The swarm's main control signal had stopped. The Deathworld was gone, but the Valen survivors whispered a final warning before falling into exhausted sleep. It never dies. It waits. The commander walked to the observation deck one last time. Through the glass, he saw the fading light of the destroyed planet. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. He recorded one last message for Earth. We came to rescue the lost, but we learned too late that mercy can be a dangerous thing. As the fleet drifted away, the silence of space returned. Yet somewhere in the distance, faint and broken, a familiar sound began to echo again, the pattern of a distress signal, repeating endlessly from the darkness. The fleet moved further from the dying planet, but the tension never left. Every sensor, every instrument, even the slightest vibration of the hull reminded them of what they had just escaped. The Valen survivors huddled quietly in the medical bay, still weak, still trembling from the experience. They stared out at the stars through the observation windows, their large dark eyes reflecting both relief and fear. No one knew what would come next. The swarm had been stopped for now, but its presence still lingered in the air, in the faint pulses of energy that even the fleet's instruments couldn't ignore. The commander called the senior officers to a meeting. They had survived an unimaginable threat, but they still needed to understand it. The readings from the Deathworld were unusual. The energy levels, the strange signals, the machines. They had never encountered anything like this. The Valen's accounts suggested that the swarm had intelligence, strategy, and patience. It didn't just attack. It studied. It learned. And worst of all, it never forgot. The fleet's scientists worked around the clock, analyzing the data collected from the underground city, the survivors' records, and the remains of the machines they had captured. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The swarm's origin was not entirely alien. Parts of it carried traces of human technology, ancient, forgotten experiments that had evolved into something beyond control. For centuries, humans had explored, experimented, and sometimes created tools they did not fully understand. Some of these experiments had gone dark, lost to history. The Deathworld had been one of them. This realization hit the commander hard. Humanity had not only stumbled into danger, but they might have caused it long ago. The swarm, the machines, the planet's strange intelligence, all could have been tied to their own history, lost to time and forgotten. The thought was sobering. They had come to help an alien race, but in doing so, they had faced the consequences of humanity's past mistakes. The Valen survivors began to recover slowly. Their strength returned, but their expressions never lost a permanent shadow of fear. The humans tried to communicate and learn from them, asking about their culture, their lives before the swarm, and their technology. The aliens shared what they could, describing cities of crystal, libraries of knowledge, and civilizations that had thrived for thousands of years. They had been peaceful, curious, and creative, much like humans themselves. And then, all of it had been destroyed. As the fleet journeyed toward a safer region of space, the commander ordered further precautions. The ships were checked for any hidden contamination from the planet's energy or machines. Security protocols were strengthened. Every crew member was briefed on what to expect if similar signals appeared again. The fleet had survived once, but they could not risk being caught unprepared again. The scientists proposed an audacious plan. They suggested using a captured drone to infiltrate the swarm's network, hoping to understand how it worked and perhaps learn how to stop it if it ever returned. The plan was risky. The drones were highly intelligent and adaptive. One wrong move could alert the swarm to human presence, or worse, trigger another attack. But the commander agreed. They had to understand what they were facing. Knowledge was the only way to survive in the future. A small team boarded a specialized ship equipped for this task. They approached the outer edge of the Deathworld's remnants, cautiously scanning for any activity. The drone they deployed was built to mimic the swarm's own design. It moved slowly, silently, and began to interface with the residual network beneath the planet. At first, there was nothing. Then faint pulses of energy began to respond, as if the swarm was aware of the intrusion but choosing to observe rather than attack. The scientists were amazed. The swarm wasn't just a mindless machine. It had memory, awareness, and a sense of strategy. It could adapt to new threats, learn from encounters, and anticipate moves before they happened. But it also seemed dormant, cautious, perhaps waiting for a larger opportunity. The human team realized the swarm had survived because it had been patient. It did not rush. It waited for mistakes, for openings, and for the moment when it could strike most effectively. Meanwhile, the Valen survivors grew stronger. They began helping the humans repair ships and analyze the planet's data. They shared fragments of their history that hinted at technologies and strategies humans had never imagined. Though their language was slow to translate, their intelligence was clear. Slowly, bonds formed between the humans and aliens. They were no longer just survivors. They became partners, working together to understand the swarm and the lessons left behind. But the calm did not last. One night, the fleet's sensors picked up a signal far from the Deathworld's location. It was weak, fragmented, and filled with distortion, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Another distress call, similar to the first, but this one came from deep space, moving fast, like it had traveled for centuries before reaching the fleet. The signal carried the same underlying energy signature as the swarm. The commander gathered his officers again. The signal could be another trap. It might be another swarm threat, another death world waiting to awaken. Or it could be a genuine call for help. The decision they faced was terrifying. Investigate and risk awakening a new threat, or ignore it and leave unknown lives in danger. The weight of responsibility pressed on everyone aboard. After long deliberation, the commander made a choice. They would follow the signal cautiously and with all defenses ready. They could not allow fear to dictate their actions. Humanity, he reminded his crew, had always reached out to help others, and they could not abandon that principle, even in the face of danger. The fleet adjusted course, moving slowly toward the signal's origin. Along the way, the scientists continued analyzing the Deathworld data, trying to identify patterns, weaknesses, and strategies that could help if the swarm reappeared. The Valen shared what they could remember, though their memories were fragmented by trauma and age. Together, they began piecing together the history of the swarm, how it had evolved, how it had been contained, and what might trigger it again. During this time, the crew dealt with their own fatigue and fear. Long hours of vigilance, constant alerts, and the memory of the Deathworld had left many exhausted. Counseling sessions were held. Crew members shared stories, and the Valen's calm, patient presence offered an unexpected comfort. The humans realized they had survived not only because of skill and technology, but because of trust, cooperation, and shared determination. As they neared the signal's source, the energy readings grew stronger. The patterns on the scanners reminded them of the Deathworld, but this place was different. The signal originated from a massive asteroid field, each rock covered in a strange metallic crust. The drones detected faint movements within the rocks, and the fleet's sensors showed that the swarm's remnants might have integrated into the asteroid itself. The commander ordered caution. Any misstep could awaken another swarm intelligence, and the fleet could be trapped as they had been before. Small exploratory drones were deployed to investigate. They moved slowly, transmitting data back, showing the twisted, half-metallic structures hidden beneath the asteroids. It was clear that the swarm's reach extended far beyond the Deathworld. The fleet held their position for several days, carefully monitoring the activity. During this time, the Valen shared more insights. They described how the swarm had once targeted worlds that posed a threat to it. It did not act randomly. It had objectives, and it adapted with horrifying efficiency. The humans began to understand the scale of the danger they faced. The swarm was not simply a force of destruction. It was a predator that could lie in wait for centuries, learning, evolving, and striking at the right moment. Finally, the fleet's scientists concluded that direct confrontation would be suicidal. The only viable option was to continue surveillance, gather intelligence, and be ready to respond if the swarm moved again. The commander agreed. They had survived the Deathworld, learned what the swarm was capable of, and gained allies in the Valen. But the war was not over. The threat was out there, patient and waiting, and the knowledge they now carried could save countless worlds, or doom them if misused. As the fleet moved on from the asteroid field, the commander recorded a message for Earth. He spoke calmly but with a weight of experience in his voice. "We have seen what patience, intelligence, and vigilance can do. The swarm is not gone, it waits. Humanity must learn. not just to survive, but to prevent the mistakes of the past from awakening what we cannot control. The Valen survivors gathered in the observation room, looking at the stars. They were alive, thanks to the humans' courage, and now they were partners in a fragile alliance. Both species had learned that survival depended not only on strength but on knowledge, trust, and the willingness to face the unknown with care and determination. Outside the fleet, the stars stretched endlessly, quiet but full of secrets. Somewhere far away, the faintest pulse of a signal repeated, a reminder that danger, like curiosity, never truly sleeps. And as the fleet continued its journey, every person aboard knew one truth: survival meant vigilance, and mercy carried a cost that could never be forgotten. The fleet drifted in the quiet of deep space, but the calm was fragile. Even after escaping the death world, the crew could feel the weight of what they had experienced. The Valen survivors sat quietly in the medical bay, their large dark eyes reflecting the endless stars outside. Though they were recovering physically, the fear and trauma remained. Every flash on the scanners, every minor fluctuation in energy readings made them tense, reminding everyone that the swarm was still out there, patient, and waiting. The commander spent hours reviewing the data collected from the death world and the asteroid field. Each reading told a story of machines that learned, adapted, and evolved, of a force that could not be reasoned with, of the consequences of humanity's long-forgotten experiments. They had survived by chance, courage, and quick thinking, but one mistake could mean extinction if the swarm ever returned. The burden of that knowledge pressed heavily on every officer. To maintain vigilance, the fleet established a strict schedule. Ships rotated through observation posts, scanning for any signs of movement, energy spikes, or unusual signals. Small exploration drones were deployed, each programmed to report back anything suspicious. The humans worked alongside the Valen, translating ancient technology and sharing strategies for survival. Their alliance was fragile, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared trauma, but it was strong enough to hold. Days passed. The fleet remained alert, and the Valen slowly regained strength. They began to share fragments of their history that were both wondrous and heartbreaking. Before the swarm, their civilization had been brilliant. Cities of crystal reflected the light of multiple suns. Libraries held knowledge of stars and machines, and art and music were intertwined with science. They spoke of the past not just in words, but through patterns and symbols that could be translated only partially. The humans listened in awe, realizing how much had been lost. One night, the sensors picked up something unusual. A faint energy signature appeared far from their current location, moving slowly but deliberately. The pattern was familiar, the swarm's intelligence active again. The fleet moved cautiously, analyzing the signal from a safe distance. It wasn't aggressive, not yet. It was watching, studying, as the drones had done on the death world. The commander called a meeting. They debated whether to investigate the source or maintain distance. The scientists argued that understanding the swarm's behavior was critical for future survival. The pilots warned of danger, recalling how quickly the death world had turned against them. After hours of discussion, a plan was formed. Small, well-protected reconnaissance teams would approach, while the fleet stayed ready to defend. Knowledge, they realized, was their only weapon. The reconnaissance ships moved carefully toward the energy signature. As they approached, the sensors detected fragments of structures, half-metallic, half-organic formations, like the ruins on the death world but smaller, scattered across a system of asteroids. It became clear that the swarm was spreading, creating nests far from its original home. These were early stages of new death worlds, incubators of the swarm's growth designed to remain hidden until fully formed. The humans and Valen worked together to study these formations. Using drones, they scanned and mapped the nests, sending data back to the fleet. Every discovery reinforced the terrifying truth. The swarm could exist anywhere in any environment, and it adapted rapidly. Each asteroid nest contained dormant machines, partially self-repairing, waiting for activation. The fleet realized that this was not just a threat to one world, but to entire systems. To prepare for the worst, the fleet strengthened their defenses. Energy shields were enhanced, weapon systems upgraded, and emergency evacuation protocols updated. Every crew member trained for combat, evacuation, and repair. Though no one wanted to fight, they knew survival depended on readiness. The Valen shared techniques for camouflage and avoidance, showing how their ancestors had hidden from the swarm for centuries. It was a race against time, to understand the enemy before it could strike again. Despite the constant threat, life aboard the fleet continued. The humans formed bonds with the Valen, sharing stories, food, and customs. Laughter returned slowly to the corridors, a fragile but vital reminder that hope was still alive. Even in space, even under the shadow of a deadly force, they found moments of humanity. The commander encouraged this, knowing that morale was as critical as technology for survival. Weeks passed. The swarm's activity remained minimal, but the fleet never let down its guard. Drones patrolled the edges of each system, scanning for hidden nests, while communication arrays monitored long-range signals. Occasionally, faint distress signals appeared, echoes of civilizations caught in the swarm's reach. The fleet recorded and cataloged them, unable to respond immediately but aware that one day, they might have to. During one long observation shift, the commander noticed something unusual in the readings from the asteroid nests. A small cluster of machines had begun to move independently, reorganizing themselves into a larger, more complex formation. This was not a simple drone activity. It suggested intelligence at work, planning, and adaptation beyond anything the fleet had previously encountered. The commander realized that the swarm's evolution was ongoing. It learned, it grew, and it might already be preparing to strike beyond the shadows. The scientists worked tirelessly to model the swarm's behavior. Using data from the Deathworld and the asteroid field, they predicted potential paths, growth rates, and nesting strategies. They discovered that the swarm operated almost like a networked intelligence, each drone and structure communicating instantaneously across vast distances. If they were not stopped, the swarm could expand uncontrollably, consuming worlds at a rate faster than humanity could respond. The Valen offered what guidance they could. They had survived by avoiding confrontation, by hiding, and by manipulating the swarm's awareness. They showed how energy fields could mask signals, how structures could be disguised, and how drones could be detected before they fully activated. It was a delicate balance of avoidance and study, a strategy of survival rather than outright combat. One quiet day, as the fleet drifted in a safe corridor, a new signal appeared. It was unlike the previous distress calls, stronger, sharper, and carrying patterns that suggested intentional communication. The scientists recognized fragments of the Valen language, but it was encoded in a way they had never seen. The commander decided to approach, careful to avoid provoking the swarm. As they neared the source, the fleet discovered a small colony of survivors, both human and Valen. They had escaped the swarm long ago, hiding in remote systems. Their presence was a relief and a warning. These survivors had learned to live quietly, avoiding detection, but they confirmed what the fleet had feared. The swarm did not sleep. It observed, learned, and adapted. Any signal, any intrusion could awaken it. The commander convened a final meeting with the senior officers and Valen leaders. They discussed the path forward. It was clear that humanity and their allies could not fight the swarm directly. The only viable strategy was vigilance, preparation, and study. Knowledge, alliances, and patience would be the key to survival. The fleet would continue monitoring, gathering intelligence, and assisting survivors when possible, but every move would have to be cautious and deliberate. As the fleet set course for a long-term monitoring orbit, the Valen survivors looked out at the stars. They spoke softly to the humans, expressing gratitude, hope, and a cautious optimism. They reminded everyone that even in the face of a seemingly unstoppable threat, life could endure with careful planning, courage, and trust in one another. The commander recorded a final report for Earth. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, aware of the weight of history and responsibility. We have seen a force beyond comprehension. It is patient, intelligent, and adaptive. We have survived by courage, cooperation, and vigilance. Humanity must learn from the mistakes of the past and respect the unknown. The swarm is out there waiting, but so are we. We will endure, we will prepare, and we will survive. The fleet drifted through the calm of space, carrying knowledge, survivors, and the memory of the death world. The stars stretched endlessly around them, full of both danger and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, faint signals pulsed like a heartbeat, echoes of worlds lost, warnings of what might come, and reminders that vigilance was the price of life. The humans and Valen stood together on observation decks, silent, watching, learning, and hoping. They had faced unimaginable threats and survived. They had witnessed mercy, loss, and courage. And as they journeyed further into the unknown, one truth remained clear. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and often cruel. But together, they had the strength to face it, not with recklessness, but with understanding, patience, and the determination to survive, no matter the cost. The distress signals continued to echo faintly through the void, and though no one moved to answer them yet, every person aboard the fleet knew that someday, somewhere they might be called again, to save life, to face danger, and to carry the weight of humanity's choices among the stars. The story of the Death World had ended, but the vigilance, courage, and unity it inspired had only just begun.